In recent months, a trend has begun to emerge in the technology industry that at first glance looks like just another wave of automation, but on closer examination reveals a fundamental shift in the labor economy. And at the center of this shift is Tesla and its seemingly side project, the humanoid robot Optimus. At first, many viewed Optimus as a demonstration product, impressive but far from real commercial viability. However, the situation changed sharply after discussions began in closed circles about the integration of new artificial intelligence models, including developments related to XAI and its Grok system. According to sources familiar with internal testing, it is this combination, the robot's physical body and advanced AI, that may become the starting point for an entirely new class of assets. We are talking about robots as income-generating units. An idea that just a couple of years ago sounded like science fiction is now increasingly being discussed at the level of investment banks, venture funds, and major corporations. Elon Musk himself has repeatedly hinted at this direction, suggesting that in the future a person could purchase a robot that works in their place and effectively generates profit, covering its own cost. But what does this mean in practice? According to insiders, Tesla is already testing scenarios in which Optimus is capable of performing a wide range of tasks, from logistics and manufacturing work to service professions. In closed demonstrations, the robot already shows the ability to work as a barista, serve customers, perform courier functions, and even interact with passengers in the role of a driver or operator of autonomous transport. The key difference from previous generations of robots is that Optimus does not simply execute pre-programmed actions. Thanks to integration with advanced language models, it is capable of analyzing situations in real time, adapting to new conditions, and making decisions without constant human supervision. And this is what makes it potentially economically autonomous. According to analysts' estimates, if such a robot can work at least 12 to 16 hours per day, performing tasks in services or logistics, its potential annual income could range from $20,000 to $60,000 depending on region and type of work, with an estimated device cost in the range of $20,000 to $30,000. This means the robot could theoretically pay for itself within 1 to 2 years. And this is the point that attracts the greatest interest from investors. Essentially, a new class of assets is emerging. Not real estate, not stocks, but a physical object with artificial intelligence that generates cash flow. Some analysts already compare this to the emergence of rental housing in the last century, or the development of car-sharing and ride-sharing platforms in the 2000s. However, along with this potential, serious risks also arise. First, there is the issue of regulation. In most countries, legislation is simply not prepared for the idea that a worker may not be human. Who is responsible for a robot's actions? Who pays taxes on its income? Can a robot be officially registered as an economic participant? According to sources in European regulatory bodies, discussions on these questions have already begun, and some countries are considering introducing special licenses for the commercial use of humanoid robots. In the United States, according to think tanks close to Congress, working groups are also being formed to study the legal consequences of mass deployment of such systems. The second risk is social pressure. If robots truly become capable of performing a significant share of service sector work, this will inevitably lead to job displacement. Even now, trade unions in some countries are expressing concern, stating that such technologies could accelerate the process of human replacement in the economy. And this is not just a theoretical threat. Scenarios modeled by analysts suggest that with the mass deployment of humanoid robots, up to 30% of jobs in the service sector could be at risk within the next 10 to 15 years. This particularly concerns professions such as couriers, cashiers, baristas, warehouse workers, and drivers. But there is also an opposing view. Some experts believe that the emergence of such technologies will create new markets and new jobs in robot maintenance, software development, system monitoring, and control. Moreover, they argue that this could lead to higher overall economic productivity and, as a result, an increase in living standards. The third key factor is competition. Despite Tesla currently being at the center of attention, other major players are also actively working in this direction. Companies from China, Japan, and South Korea are already presenting their own humanoid robot prototypes, while technology giants are investing billions of dollars into AI and robotics development. According to insiders, China is already considering the possibility of mass-producing robots for the domestic market in order to support industry and reduce dependence on human labor. In Japan, traditionally strong positions in robotics may give the country an advantage in service robots. This means that in the coming years, a real humanoid race may begin. And in this race, the key factor will not only be hardware, but also intelligence. That is why integration of advanced AI systems such as Grok is considered a critical advantage. A robot without intelligence is just a machine. A robot with AI is a full participant in the economy. But how realistic are these scenarios? According to analysts' estimates, the first commercially viable models capable of performing a wide range of tasks could appear within 3 to 5 years. However, mass adoption, where robots become accessible to ordinary users, will likely take 7 to 10 years. This is the time horizon currently being discussed in investment circles. Some venture funds are already beginning to build portfolios focused on a robotized economy, including not only device manufacturers, but also companies creating infrastructure, from charging stations to cloud-based management platforms. Interestingly, entirely new business models are already emerging in this context. For example, robot as a service, where a user does not buy the device but rents it, receiving a share of its income, or shared ownership models, where several investors purchase a robot and split the profits from its operation. This effectively turns robots into financial instruments. However, the main question remains trust. Are people ready to entrust a robot not only with physical labor, but also with customer interaction? Are companies ready to integrate such systems into their workflows? And are governments ready to allow it? The answer is not yet clear. But one thing can be said with certainty. If even part of these scenarios becomes reality, we will be standing on the threshold of a new economic era, where the boundary between humans and machines in the context of labor will gradually begin to fade. And perhaps, for the first time in history, a situation will emerge where work is no longer a mandatory condition for income, because the work will no longer be done by a human, but by their robot. But the story does not end there. According to information from several sources close to major technology funds in Silicon Valley, interest in what is being called the second layer of the robotic economy has surged in recent months. If the first layer is when a robot simply performs work instead of a human, then the second layer is when robots begin interacting with each other, forming fully autonomous chains of production and services. Imagine a situation. One robot works in a coffee shop, another handles logistics, a third manages a warehouse, a fourth repairs equipment, and all of them are connected by a single AI-based control system. In this system, the human is no longer a participant in the process, but its owner. This scenario is now being actively discussed in analytical reports from publications such as Bloomberg and Financial Times, where the idea is increasingly raised that within the next 10 to 15 years, a parallel economy may emerge in which a significant share of work is performed by machines. Insiders claim that Tesla is already considering the possibility of creating its own platform for managing such robots, a kind of app store for labor, where owners could assign their Optimus robots to different tasks and receive payments automatically. In effect, this is the creation of a market where work becomes a digital service. And here, another extremely important point emerges: scale. If today we are talking about thousands or tens of thousands of robots, then in the case of successful commercialization, the number could grow to millions of devices. Some analysts suggest that within 15 to 20 years, the number of humanoid robots in the world could exceed the number of people employed in the service sector. And this is no longer just a technological trend. It is a structural transformation of the entire global economy. However, along with scale comes risk. One of the most widely discussed scenarios is capital concentration. If robots truly become a source of income, the question arises: who will own them? If most of the devices end up in the hands of large corporations or a small group of investors, This could lead to even greater social inequality. Some economists already warn about the risk of forming an economy of machine owners, where a small group of people captures most of the income while the rest of the population loses access to traditional sources of employment. Against this backdrop, the topic of universal basic income is increasingly being raised. Interestingly, Elon Musk himself has previously expressed support for such ideas, noting that with advancing automation, society may eventually need to rethink the very concept of work. But for now, this remains at the level of discussion. Far more concrete steps are being taken in the field of safety. According to sources in the industry, one of the key regulatory requirements will be mandatory certification of robots before they are allowed to operate in human environments. This includes not only physical safety, but also behavioral models, how a robot reacts in stressful situations, how it makes decisions, and how it interacts with its surroundings. And here again, artificial intelligence plays a central role. The integration of systems such as xAI's developments could give robots a level of contextual understanding previously unattainable. But at the same time, this introduces new risks, from decision-making errors to potential system vulnerabilities. Some experts are already talking about the need for digital insurance for robots, analogs of car insurance that would cover potential damage caused by machine actions. And this is only the beginning. Special attention is also being paid to competition between countries. If in the past, technological leadership was defined primarily by the development of the internet, mobile technologies, and cloud services, now robotics is moving to the forefront. Countries that are able to deploy and scale such systems more quickly will gain a massive economic advantage. According to analytical centers, China is already considering humanoid robots as a strategic resource comparable in importance to energy or rare earth metals. In the United States, meanwhile, cooperation between the private sector and the government in the field of AI and robotics is intensifying. This means that in the coming years, we may witness not only a technological race, but also a geopolitical one. And in this race, every new development becomes an element of strategy. But there is another aspect that is rarely spoken about openly, the psychological one. Is society ready to accept the fact that humanoid machines, increasingly resembling humans in appearance and behavior, will constantly be present alongside people? Are people ready to delegate to them not only physical work, but also social interactions? Early experiments show that societal reactions are mixed. On the one hand, people quickly adapt to convenience. If a robot truly makes life easier, saving time and money, resistance gradually decreases. On the other hand, there remains a factor of distrust, especially when it comes to interactions in personal space. That is why companies working in this field devote enormous attention to robot design and behavior, from facial expression to movement patterns and ways of communication. The goal is simple: to make them as natural as possible. But the closer a robot becomes to a human, the stronger the so-called uncanny valley effect becomes, where small imperfections begin to cause discomfort. And this is yet another problem that must be solved. Nevertheless, despite all risks and questions, the overall direction of development remains clear. The world is moving toward automation, and if automation once meant replacing individual processes, it now increasingly means replacing entire professions. And perhaps in the coming decades, we will see a situation where owning a personal robot becomes as standard as owning a car or a smartphone today. And at that moment, the question will no longer be whether this is necessary, but who got there first? Because as history shows, in technological revolutions, it is not those who hesitate who win. It is those who are first to understand the direction. And if current trends continue, humanoid robots may become not just another stage of technological development, but the foundation of a new economic system. A system in which the main resource is no longer human time, but the productivity of the machine working in its place. But if we look even deeper, it becomes clear that this is not just about a new technology or even a new market. It may be about a potential transformation of the very model of capitalism itself. Because for the first time, a tool is emerging that could potentially separate income from a person's direct participation in labor. And this is exactly the point that is now being actively discussed in closed analytical reports of major banks and consulting firms. According to sources close to Goldman Sachs and McKinsey & Company, scenarios are already being modeled in which the mass deployment of humanoid robots could reshape the GDP structure of entire countries. In one such scenario, up to 20% of small businesses begin using robots instead of part of their workforce. This leads to lower operating costs, higher margins, and consequently a redistribution of profits toward capital owners. But this is where a very subtle and potentially dangerous issue emerges. If access to such robots is limited, for example, due to high costs or control by large corporations, it could lead to a sharp increase in inequality. Those who can afford a worker robot would begin to generate passive income, while others would find themselves in a less favorable position. And this is already raising concern among economists. Some experts openly warn about the risk of forming a two-tier economy, where one part of society owns robots and receives income, while the other must compete with them for the remaining jobs. That is why in several countries discussions have begun about radical measures. For example, the introduction of a so-called robot tax, an idea previously raised in Europe. The concept is that companies or individuals using robots for profit would pay an additional tax that would be redistributed to society. However, this idea is controversial. On one hand, it could slow down technological adoption. On the other hand, without such mechanisms, governments risk facing rising unemployment and social instability. In parallel, another important dimension is developing infrastructure. For robots to truly become widespread, an entire ecosystem is required. This includes not only the devices themselves, but also charging systems, maintenance services, software updates, and cloud platforms through which management and training will occur. According to insiders, Tesla is already considering building its own robotic network, similar to its supercharger network for electric vehicles. Within this network, Optimus would be able to connect to the cloud, receive updates, share experience with other robots, and even receive tasks. In effect, this could become something like an app store for robots. Developers would be able to create skills and work scenarios, for example, barista work, food delivery, cleaning services, and sell them to robot owners. This opens up an enormous software market, and this is where two worlds intersect, the physical and the digital. Because while apps previously existed only in smartphones, they may now come alive in the real world through robots. And this creates an entirely new level of interaction between technology and everyday life. But alongside this come new threats. One of the main risks is security. If a robot is connected to a network and controlled via the cloud, the question arises, what happens if the system is hacked? Or if an algorithm fails? According to sources in cybersecurity, scenarios of attacks on robotic systems are already being modeled. And while companies are actively working on protection, experts warn that absolute security does not exist. The second risk is dependency. If people begin to rely heavily on robots in everyday life, it could lead to a decline in human skills and autonomy. Some analysts already draw parallels with dependence on smartphones and navigation systems. But in the case of robots, the stakes are much higher, because this is not just about information, but about the physical world, about who prepares food, operates transport, and performs labor. And here a philosophical question emerges. Where is the boundary between a tool and an independent participant in the system? Some experts believe that with the development of AI, robots will gradually begin to be perceived not as devices, but as agents, systems capable of making decisions and interacting with the world at a more complex level. And this changes not only the economy, but also society's perception of technology. Interestingly, according to confidential surveys conducted among top executives of large companies, more than 60% believe that within the next 10 years, robots will become an integral part of business. At the same time, around 30% are already considering investments in such solutions. And this is only the beginning, because if the technology truly reaches the expected level, the next stage could be the integration of robots into everyday life at the household level. Imagine a situation in which every family has its own robot, not just an assistant, but a full participant in the economy. It works, earns money, and covers part of the family's expenses. This sounds like science fiction, but these are exactly the kinds of scenarios currently being discussed in technological circles. Perhaps the most unexpected effect is that this could change the very concept of work itself. If work was once a necessity, in the future, it may become a choice. People will be able to focus on what they truly care about: creativity, science, development, while routine tasks are handled by robots. However, this scenario is only possible under one condition: if technology develops quickly enough, and if societies are able to adapt to these changes. Because history shows that technological revolutions do not happen gradually, but in leaps. And if current trends continue, the next leap may be much closer than it seems. And then the question will no longer be whether robots that can work for us will appear, but whether we are ready for a world in which they actually do.